Welcome to the Groundwater Sustainability Plan Assessment Question and Answer Session. My name is Stephen Springhorn, and I'm the Acting Deputy Director of Statewide Groundwater Management at the California Department of Water Resources. And on behalf of our DWR team, who I'll introduce in a minute, we'd like to thank all of you for attending the webinar this morning. Next slide, please. The topics we wanted to cover today are shown here on the slide. And we wanted to start with an update on the regulatory decisions that we have made on the first groundwater sustainability plans and provide some initial findings of what we saw in those plans in an effort to share this information with all of you and the SGMA community and specifically the GSAs awaiting decisions on their plans and those GSAs that are still developing their plans that are due in about 7 months in January of 2022. Then after that, that'll be followed with an update on the state assistance that we have available now or that will become available that is aligned to our regulatory decisions, again, in an effort to support successful implementation of SGMA and the groundwater sustainability plans. And then after that, we've reserved the majority of the time today with the main focus of today, which is to be answering questions and having that dialogue around these initial evaluations, assessments, and our review process and where we go next. So right now I'd like to introduce the rest of the team that's here on this call. And I'll start with Craig Altair, Keith Wallace, Melissa Sparks-Kranz, Tim Godwin, Monica Reese, Mark Nordberg, and Eric Soderlund from the DWR team. And then we're also joined today by Sarah Sugar from the State Water Resources Control Board. And then also Kirsten Pringle and Marisa Perez-Reyes from Stantec are also on helping us carry out the webinar today, and also will be helping with the question and answer session. So we have a good group here ready to engage with all of you and answer your questions that you have today. So before we dive in, I wanted to cover some just logistics. So next slide, please, on how to dial in the audio for the webinar and then how to submit your questions as we're going through. So first, on the audio side, there are two ways to access the audio for this presentation. You can either use your computer's audio, either speakers or your headset, or you can call in using your telephone using the call-in information shown in GoToWebinar. This slide and the confirmation email you received. So it should be in a couple different places for you. Just one quick note is that all participants' microphones are muted while we're speaking and presenting, just to reduce the background noise for everyone's benefit. And then please note that we are recording this webinar today, and that the recording of the webinar and the link to the slides and handouts will be made publicly available after the webinar on our web pages. And so there'll be more information on which web page and when that will be available. Then next slide, please. So we're going to start out with a short presentation that I'll kick it off and then turn it over to Craig Altair. But before we do that, again, we want to make sure that we're maximizing the opportunity for all of you to submit questions. And how you do that is there's a couple ways. The first way is by submitting questions in the questions box in your GoToMeeting or GoToWebinar control panel. Make sure make sure it's the questions box, not the chat, because there are two different options. So please use the questions box. Then the second way for submitting a question is to submit that question directly to the Sustainable Groundwater Management Office through our email, which is sgmps@water.ca.gov. Again, I'll repeat that. It's sgmps@water.ca.gov. So once we've received the questions, they'll be read aloud by our facilitator, Kirsten Pringle, and then our staff and our team here will be responding to those questions. Kirsten will repeat these instructions in more detail before the question and answer session kicks off, just after this intro presentation, so you'll have more instructions at that time. And so if we don't get to your question today, we'll do our best to get to as many questions as we can today, but please email questions, and again, the webinar itself will be recorded, and that recording will be made publicly available on our DWR webpage. All right, so let's dive in to the first presentation. If you go to the next slide, please. There you go. And before I turn it over to Craig, I just wanted to take a moment just to mark the milestone that we collectively are where we are at now, right now, with the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act implementation. Although we only have 4 basins with either assessments or these letters that are out, it does mark a big milestone in these last 6 years of going from when the act was passed, signed into law in early 2015, and here we are today with almost 50 GSPs that have been submitted, being implemented, and we have reviews going out on those, or assessments on those initial plans, and then we have another wave of another 70 plus plans that are in their final development that will be submitted in just over 7 months. So it just shows that there's a huge amount of work that has gone in to date across the entire SGMA community, from the groundwater sustainability agencies to the community-based organizations or non-governmental organizations that have been commenting or participating, to the community members in these basins, and everyone else that represents the SGMA community. And just want to really, from our team at DWR, wanted to say thank you for all of the hard work that's been put in to date, and thanks in advance for all the hard work that it's going to take moving forward as these plans are implemented and adapted through time to reach statewide sustainability. So just wanted to just touch on that, and then I'll turn it over to Craig to go over these first decisions and where they were, and then what they mean as we move forward. So take it away, Craig.
Thanks, Stephen. Again, I'll echo what Stephen said. We're really happy to be here today to be able to convey some information to the SGMA community about what I'm sure you all are aware of, which is our first release of GSP decisions. So, as the slide shows, and again, probably the reason some of you are here today is to hear more about, on June 3rd, we released the first decisions, and that included notifying the GSAs in the Santa Cruz Mid-County Basin and the 180 400-foot aquifer subbasin that their GSPs were approved. Additionally, we transmitted letters to the GSAs in the Paso Robles subbasin and the Kiama Valley Basin, notifying them that their plans likely had 1 or more deficiencies that needed to be addressed, and in those letters initiated consultation. And we'll talk on the next slide about what those letters mean in a bit more detail. Of course, we have many other GSPs that we're reviewing right now with deadlines to release assessments for many of those plans, or most of those plans, no later than January 2022. And we do plan to release decisions later in the year in calendar year 2021 and in early 2022 as well. And of course, we will notify the public when those decisions are released. More information about the first assessments can be found at the link below. You can also see a video message that Stephen and I recorded if you'd like to see that. So next slide. Okay. So we'll talk, I want to spend really the next 2 slides talking about some of the most maybe frequently asked questions, almost maybe preempt a few questions that are likely to come in today, or that maybe some of you brought into this meeting. And I'd say the most asked item related to this first batch of material has been related to those notification letters that I mentioned for the Paso Robles and the Kiama Basin, and a lot of questions about what does that mean. So again, our review teams identified 1 or more deficiencies in those basins, and that starts a process. That anytime that the review teams identify deficiencies in these plans that need to be addressed, ultimately DWR either would find those plans to be incomplete or inadequate. But if the department identifies that those deficiencies could be addressed, then we can start a process where we consult with the local agencies about the amount of time needed. And that's really what these letters represent. So if you kind of follow this flow chart at the bottom of the slide, once a deficiency has been identified, we can notify the GSA, and that's what we did. And that is not a final determination that the GSPs are incomplete or inadequate, but rather it lets us talk to the GSA about the time they need to address those deficiencies. And so we're already in discussions with both of those basins to set up some time with DWR and the local agency to consult about the deficiencies. After that meeting takes place, and if the GSAs feel that they can address those deficiencies, then the department would finalize this determination, and that final determination would come no later than January 2022. That final determination, if the plans are incomplete, would start the 180-day, or the no more than 180-day period in which those GSAs would need to address the deficiencies. So this process, is supportive of the iterative nature of Sigma, where it's the first opportunity for deficiencies to be addressed. It also provides some communication not just to those GSAs but to other basins as well about how DWR is reviewing the plans. So if there's any other questions about this process, we can address those during the Q&A. Next slide. Another question that I've received and the team has received fairly regularly kind of deals with the differences between plans that are approved that may have recommended corrective actions versus these required corrective actions. And I want to say right up front that our DWR acknowledges certainly that no plan is going to be perfect. The GSP regulations have numerous line items, and we do understand that plans will improve through time as additional information is collected, as additional data is collected, as additional experience is gained in sustainably managing groundwater. But as I mentioned, plans that are approved may have recommended corrective actions. Those are plans that substantially comply with our GSP regulations. And DWR has identified certain things that we really do feel should be addressed, perhaps by the 5-year update. But I want to make sure that everyone's clear that those are not, it's not a conditional approval or a qualified approval. Those plans are fully approved, but we do suggest that the GSAs take those recommended corrective actions seriously and consider those as they're implementing their plans and as they are addressing the other actions that they've generally self-identified that they need to address as well, things like data gaps and things of that nature. Where our review teams have identified that there are significant deficiencies, though, those items need to be addressed sooner than, for example, in a 5-year update. And in those cases, the GSAs would have up to 180 days after the determination is made to address the deficiency, as I talked about in the last slide. Again, any questions about that, we can address that during the Q&A period. So next slide. All right. Wanted to take a couple slides now and talk about some of the general initial findings from the GSP review. These aren't specific to any one basin in particular, but they may be useful for you if you are in another basin, for example, with the GSP under review, or if you're preparing a GSP for review now. And it really is intended to just provide some more information. So you can go to the next slide, please. Animation will come in. So one of our initial findings, and maybe one of the higher level takeaways, is that while eliminating overdraft is central to sustainable groundwater management, it's not the only requirement. The law and the regulations identify that undesirable results need to be identified in each basin, and then the plans need to be implemented in such a way with projects and management actions to avoid or eliminate those undesirable results. And that is a central concept to Sigma. If you look, the material on the slide largely is taken from our sustainable management criteria, best management practice. There's a link on the slide. You can find that on our website. I really would recommend everybody involved in GSP preparation and review take a look at that best management practice document and And note, as shown on the slide and as talked about additionally in GSP, sustainable yield is really tied to the avoidance of undesirable results. And so again, it's not just about zeroing out changes in storage, perhaps. It's also about avoiding undesirable results. So that's a concept that needs to be addressed seriously in these GSPs. Next slide. With the animation, so go ahead and give me the next mouse click. Okay. So building on what we talked about in the previous slide, it's really important that GSAs developing GSPs identify the specific significant and unreasonable effects in their basins that make up those undesirable results. The more detail they can provide about the specifics of those effects, the better. Next mouse click. And then for those of you, again, who are deep in Sigma and understanding minimum thresholds, measurable objectives, and if you're not, again, I'd recommend going to check out the best management practice document. But kind of the next step, once the undesirable results are identified, is to define those site-specific minimum thresholds and measurable objectives. As the regulations require and as we were looking for, the GSPs really need to justify why those minimum thresholds were selected. And the GSPs should be a venue to evaluate and document the evaluation and disclose the effects on beneficial uses and users of those minimum thresholds. And there's, of course, a variety of beneficial uses and users in the various groundwater basins, a list of which is shown there from one of our Sigma documents. But again, that evaluate and disclose those effects is important. Of course, to meet sustainability, GSPs will need to include projects and actions, especially where basins are, previously overdrafted before Sigma. So those projects and actions need to be consistent with both, again, avoiding undesirable results and mitigating overdraft. And comprehensive approaches are better. The two main knobs being the supply augmentation and on one hand and the demand reduction on the other. Ideally, including robust projects and actions that include both of those as options to show to the department and to others how the plans, once they're implemented, will achieve sustainability. Next slide. Or sorry, next click. And then finally, clearly showing your work, and that's like kind of an overarching theme here, and identifying data gaps. Data gaps are okay. We know, again, that no plan is perfect, and pre-Sigma, the monitoring networks associated with all the undesirable results from Sigma, the sustainability indicators weren't perfect. So GSAs should be upfront in identifying data gaps, and then also in identifying detailed schedules to fill those data gaps. Because those data gaps, as they're identified, are important knowledge gaps that need to be filled in order to sustainably manage basins. Next step, or next mouse click, please. So now we'll talk, transition to kind of the next steps and then talking about state assistance. So go ahead and get to the next slide. So it's really important to note that, the GSAs get the powers and authorities to implement their plans once they're adopted. And so our expectation is those plans, even while they're being reviewed by the department, are also being implemented by the local agencies. And so the bottom line there, arrow, really all GSAs, the next step is to continue implementation. If we could get the next mouse click. So for those basins that have approved assessments, of course, they'll continue implementing their plans, making plans to address data gaps and incorporate recommended corrective actions into that 5-year update, which again is kind of the no less frequently than every 5 years, the GSAs need to assess their progress in implementing the plan. And they're also preparing annual reports along the way. Those basins that received letters, again, I mentioned DWR is already engaging with the GSAs there and setting up meetings to talk about those deficiencies and the amount of time that they'll need. So those next steps are already underway. Next click. For the other critically overdrafted basins, and really it's not just critically overdrafted basins, it's not even just the basins with GSPs in, because there are a few basins that are not critically overdrafted that have GSPs. This first bullet under this last item really applies to all GSAs. We really recommend people review those assessments and those letters and try to understand how the department has reviewed the plans, and kind of important takeaways from that. Again, ask questions if you have them. For basins that do have plans under review now, though, we recommend that you start making preparations, whether that's having staff ready, consultants ready, et cetera, to respond to the determinations if in fact there are some deficiencies identified. Again, those determinations will be released no later than January 2022, and 180 days is not a long time. So being ready now with a plan for how you'll respond, I think, is very prudent. Next click. As Steve mentioned, there's nearly 70 plans that we anticipate being submitted by January 31st of next year. I know that there's a lot of activity underway right now in much of the state to accomplish that task, that heavy lift. We do want to note for those GSAs from those basins that are listening, also be thinking about your annual report. SGMA does require that every April 1st, after you submit a plan, that the annual report is submitted to the department, and that's not something that the department can waive. So be ready on April 1st, 2022 to submit your first annual report. As it relates to the submittal of GSPs, we do plan to host a webinar later this fall, kind of on a nuts and bolts of how to submit your plan. That's going to be really useful for those, those staff at GSAs or consultant staff who are going to be the ones actually loading documents onto our portal, clicking the buttons. We did one of those webinars in the run-up to the 2020 submission of GSPs, and that recording is on our website. However, we'll do it again. Talk about any updates to the system that have been implemented since that time. However, if in advance of that webinar you do have questions related to submittal of your GSP, use that email address shown on the slide, gspsubmittal@water.ca.gov. You can also reach out to your DWR basin point of contact, which you can find at the link below on the slide. And then finally, we consolidated on our SGMA portal, which is the website where all the SGMA related documents like GSPs and annual reports are loaded. We consolidated a lot of the resources, kind of the how-to guides, under a resources link that's shown below there. So check that out if you're interested in how to submit information to the portal. Next click. And then finally, just wanted to note too, there are, I believe, 9 basins with approved alternatives. Those basins are preparing to submit the first 5-year update for those approved alternatives, which is due by January 2022. We'll have more information to come about how those basins with approved alternatives should accomplish that. But again, if you're one of those basins and you have questions, use that same GSP submittal at water.ca.gov email address or contact the DWR POC with those specific questions. We can help you out with that. All right, next click. So I'm going to transition now to my colleague, Keith Wallace, and he's going to talk about some of DWR's planning assistance.
Thank you, Craig. Appreciate that. So yeah, we want to talk a little bit about, our just provide a quick reminder about our existing planning assistance. We have a number of resources, that are specifically designed to support local outreach and engagement efforts. So including, we have a communication and engagement toolkit on our assistance and engagement page. And these materials are things that will help, GSAs educate their interested parties and really encourage participation in SGMA implementation efforts. We also host webinars events just like this one, and for the purpose of sharing information with broad of an audience as possible. But then we also have some additional staff support, guidance and services, such as our basin points of contact that Craig just referenced a few minutes ago. These are staff members from our regional office that are dedicated to each of the high and medium priority basins, and these folks attend meetings either virtually, or in person to answer questions. And really to act as a liaison between the locals and our program. So this includes, getting questions answered on how to upload your GSP to the portal, or just, being available to respond to other, program-related questions. So next we have some guidance documents, and this is really to support, general stakeholder engagement, but we also have some guidance documents that are specific to tribal engagement and also underrepresented community engagement. Next, we have facilitation support services. And so this is where we have a contract available to us that provides us access to trained facilitators that can be, assigned to a basin, upon request. these facilitators, they can help with stakeholder outreach, as well as just general meeting facilitation. And so the way that you can access this service is by applying online. We are continuously accepting applications. It's not like a grant program where there's a set deadline or anything like that. And then the same goes for our written translation services. We have a team of translators that are available to allow for the translation of written documents in up to 8 different languages. And this is also upon request. And you can apply online through our assistance and engagement webpage. Next slide, please. So we also want to talk about some of our known and potential financial assistance that is either part of our program now or maybe coming to our program as a result of this next year's budget. So what we know we have in hand right now is we currently have funding for our second round of the Sustainable Groundwater Management Implementation Grant Program. So we have about $70 million available for the construction of projects that support GSP implementation, and this program will begin starting next year. So again, this funding is confirmed. It's provided by Proposition 68, but these next 2 items are proposals in the governor's budget and not quite confirmed. So next click, please. So this first one came from our the January budget, and this is $60 million to support GSP development and implementation in the critically overdrafted basins. And so actually this funding was part of the budget that was approved by the legislature last week, but that's still waiting for governor's approval. So technically that funding is not guaranteed just yet. Next slide, please, or next click. And then we also have some funding for SIGMA implementation that came about from the May revise. And so specifically, this is $300 million, and it would be for the following things. It's for infrastructure projects to improve water supply, water quality, and the reliability of drinking water wells. It can provide technical assistance grants to ensure engagement with underrepresented communities, or provide underrepresented communities with direct, tangible drinking water quality and supply benefits where analysis and mitigation are needed. So, this funding this funding proposal was deferred to later in the summer by the legislature. But assuming that these last 2 items are approved, they would allow locals to apply for funding to address the recommended and required corrective actions that we were just talking about. We could perform studies that will fill data gaps needed for 5-year updates, can conduct outreach and engagement to beneficial users, especially those in underrepresented communities, and then to construct projects that will support GSP implementation and improve water supply reliability. So similar to past grant rounds, we'll release some draft guidelines for public comment before we start any grant program. But however, we're working on, we are also working on a survey that we want to share with interested parties through our listserv to really help us better understand current funding needs. So this will inform the development of our draft guidelines, and so we anticipate this survey being released before the end of this month. Next slide, please. Thank you. So lastly, we want to talk about some additional potential funding that may be available to support our technical assistance program. And so the first elements, these are all part of the May revise, just like the $300 million from the last slide. But as part of that, there's $10 million to DWR for the acceleration of the collection of and reporting of subsidence data. So this is also known as INSAR data, and what this would do is would increase the collection of the INSAR data from yearly to quarterly. And then next mouse click, please. Next one too, please. So there's $49 million that's also assigned right now to DWR for critical data collection, and as part of that, that can include enhanced groundwater monitoring, which would be near disadvantaged communities, interconnected surface water and groundwater systems, and groundwater-dependent ecosystems. It will also support groundwater accounting, so this includes guidance and data standards that can help support efficient and equitable markets. And then it would also expand our AEM surveying project. So starting next month, DWR is conducting AEM surveys to better understand groundwater basin characterization. This money would allow for the surveys to be conducted in additional parts of the state that aren't currently part of our project at this moment. So also want to share some additional information just about some ongoing efforts that are happening right now. First being, with talking about AEM, we recently held on June 8th a webinar to talk about the upcoming surveys. And so if you want more information, you can click on this link. We'll have this presentation available as a PDF. And then some other efforts that we have going on as it relates to water accounting and water trading include that the California Water Commission recently hosted a water trading expert panel at the June 16th meeting. And then there's going to be a workshop on the accounting platform, which will be hosted. Actually, I guess that was yesterday. My apologies. The workshop for accounting platform was hosted, by the California Water Data Consortium in EDF. And so I think that presentation will be available online, even if you weren't able to participate during yesterday's presentation. So that's it as far as assistance coverage goes. I'm going to turn it back over to Stephen.
All right. Thank you, Craig and Keith, for that overview and presentation. And so now what we're going to do is we're going to spend the rest of the time that we have today answering questions. And so we've seen a number of questions coming in, so thank you for submitting those already. And also we encourage you to continue submitting questions, and we'll queue those up and answer as many as we can with the time we have today. All right, so if we can go to the next slide, please. And we'll get into, again, the audio options. So if you're still in need of tuning in to the webinar, you've got a couple of options here. The first is the computer audio, and then the second is using your telephone, using the numbers that are shown on the screen there, as well as the numbers that you received in your confirmation email. So we'll go to the next slide there, and then this is where we'll leave this slide up during the Q&A session as we go into that, just so you have this in front of you. You can see how to submit questions, and again, using the questions tab on the GoToMeeting or GoToWebinar dashboard. And so, or if you don't have or are not logged into GoToWebinar right now, there is that option. Our team is monitoring our sgmps@water.ca.gov email address, and we'll be looking for questions there as well. And then please do indicate if you would not like your name to be read or put into the record. Please do indicate that when you submit your question. Okay, with that, we're excited to be answering questions today, and we'll start that off. So I'll turn it over to Kirsten, and we'll start with some questions and answers.
Hi, everyone. This is Marisa. Looks like I will be reading the questions today. Let me just pop over. All right, our first question is, why did DWR release these 4 basins first?
This is Craig Altair. I can take a crack at that first question. So, of course, all the groundwater sustainability plans are complex documents. I'm sure anyone who's prepared one or reviewed one would agree. There's a lot of information there. In some cases, I think the largest volume case, the GSP, was over 13,000 pages of technical information. So undoubtedly complex documents, but the first 4 basins that we reviewed were relatively less complex. Each one of those basins was represented by a single plan or single GSP for the entire subbasin, and that's in contrast to some basins that chose to submit multiple plans for a single basin. Geographically, too, these were more isolated and had less adjacent basin issues. And so that's one of the reasons we chose these 4. I mean, there's no formula for which comes next, and I've actually gotten several questions for people trying to read the tea leaves about what the next batch would be. again, these were ready to go and from relatively simpler basins, and that's why these 4 first.
Thanks, Stephen. And I just want to confirm, can everyone hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Great. So we're going to move into our second question. So this question is for Stephen. What are the benefits for releasing these early assessments and notifications of consultation letters?
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think I'd start out with just saying that, our team, a review team at DWR, we really take our review role very seriously in looking at these plans and also trying to provide as much clarity as we can to the regulated community. And so that being said, we wanted to start that process as early as we could to start sharing information in this new regulatory construct, making sure that, it's directed to these 4 basins, but also to the larger community that still has plans under review. So actions can be started to be taken at the local level in preparation for receiving information from us. And Craig did a nice job of laying this out in the presentation. Is we know that according to the regulations that there's up to 180 days to address deficiencies if a plan is deemed incomplete, and we want to make sure that we're having local agencies maximize that time and being ramped up and ready to take action on the ground. And then also just more generally, this process allows us to be releasing information and getting that off of our plate, if you will, because we do know that there is a lot more coming and we have a lot of work to continue to do. And so the more we can release now, we're able to get things moving and preparing for the next wave of decisions that are coming. And again, the local agencies will be aware of how that's going to play out and ready for it. And it just really is, we're trying to be as communicative as we can and really contribute to this iterative process or adaptive process that Sigma really lays out for us moving forward over the Sigma implementation horizon. And so for the notification letters themselves, again, we want to just make sure that it's known that these are not final determinations, as Craig mentioned, and it really is the start of the conversation. So we have a common understanding between how we've reviewed that information, what we saw, and then communicating that to the GSA, and then taking those next steps to, if it does become an incomplete determination, then it's widely known what happens next, and there's readiness for that. So I'll stop there.
Thanks, Stephen. We're going to move on to the third question. This one's also for you, so if you could just stay on. What should the other basins who have submitted groundwater sustainability plans for review but have not received their determinations be focused on?
Okay. All right. So I touched on this a little bit, and Craig definitely hit on this in the presentation, is that we strongly encourage all GSAs to be reading these materials in these first releases, because it's really explaining and showing how we at DWR are evaluating the plans. And so again, for the GSAs that have plans under review, or the GSAs that are still developing plans, it's important information to understand how we're reviewing plans, and then the process of how we release our decisions, and then the next steps after those decisions. So that I would just really highlight that, and then would also say that that if in your basins, if you haven't heard from us yet, and if you're able to be working with your basin entities or interests, so whether it's your technical advisory committees, local decision makers, the communities in your basins, getting everyone ready to respond to when we provide feedback, that would be very helpful as well. And then again, we do plan to be releasing subsequent GSP assessments in a tiered manner throughout the rest of this year and into early 2022, and prior to that 2-year statutory deadline that we have. So there's a lot to be looked at in this first batch of information, and there's a lot more coming as well. So I'll end it there. Thank you.
Thanks. So the next question is for Craig. Craig, will groundwater sustainability plans within the same subbasin be reviewed within the same period?
Yeah, that's an easy one. Yes, the answer is yes. All those basins that opted to develop multiple plans under a coordination agreement should expect that the DWR review will be consolidated for the subbasin and come at the same time.
I'll ask you to stay on because the next couple questions are for you. So the next one is, under the incomplete pathways, when does the 180-day period to address plan deficiencies begin?
So as we said, that comes after our final determination is made, and the plan for now is that those would not come until January 2022. But once those final determinations are made, then the 180-day clock starts.
And this is a kind of follow-up question. Under the incomplete pathways, are there multiple opportunities or subsequent periods to improve a plan after the 180-day period?
No, so the department will review the information that the local agencies prepare in response, whether that's plan amendments, memos, et cetera. And we will determine whether that material is responsive to deficiencies and address the deficiencies sufficiently. If those deficiencies were addressed, then we would approve the plan, and there could be other recommended corrective actions. And if they weren't addressed, then we may determine that the GSP is inadequate.
And this is a question about the recommended corrective actions that you were mentioning. Will the Groundwater Sustainability Agency need to address the recommended corrective actions in the 5-year Groundwater Sustainability Plan update?
So as I mentioned before, the recommended corrective actions for approved plans, that's not a conditional approval or a qualified approval. Those plans are fully approved. But because of the nature of our DWR's role to review plans on an ongoing basis to determine that they're likely to achieve the sustainability goal and that they're being implemented in a way that's likely to achieve the sustainability goal, we really recommend that the GSAs take those recommended corrective actions seriously, because although they were not sufficiently serious to warrant finding the plan incomplete or inadequate at this time, the absence of that material could in the future. And so those agencies should take action, early to plan for how to address those recommended corrective actions, whether it's in 5-year updates or even progress towards achieving them can be documented in annual reports.
Okay, so now we're going to switch topics a little. How can a groundwater sustainability agency address sustainable management criteria development with limited data?
So as I mentioned when we were talking about data gaps earlier, certainly we understand that information related to certain sustainability indicators was limited, under the previous pre-SGMA groundwater management. And that's understood. What we are looking for, though, is that the GSAs are using the best available data to address developing sustainable management criteria, especially where those sustainability indicators are applicable for a basin. So if your basin, for example, has or is likely to have interconnected surface water, then using the best available data to develop initial sustainable management criteria for that indicator would be prudent, along with explaining how the GSA plans to collect better information about that indicator as the plans are implemented so they can manage that more effectively. Again, identifying data gaps and areas where uncertainty exists is okay. We just want to see a plan to fill those data gaps as the plans are implemented. I think that's it for that question.
Great, thank you, Craig. So the next question is for Stephen. How will groundwater sustainability agencies need to clearly show they're making progress towards the recommended corrective actions in their annual report?
All right, thank you. Yeah, so I think it's widely known that it's the responsibility for the GSAs to achieve the objectives of the GSP and reach sustainability. And so the annual reports and 5-year updates really provide that opportunity to demonstrate that progress towards those objectives and filling those gaps. And so really the annual report provides that opportunity. The 5-year update is the bigger milestone there to provide updates, and then we'll be looking at those plans again at those 5-year check-in points. And then wanted to highlight that the department will continue to provide various assistance programs to GSAs to help fill data gaps or improve on parts of the plan or address recommended corrective actions. And so as Keith highlighted, there's a number of planning, technical, and financial assistance that's available to help with this as well. And then really those basin points of contact from our regional offices are a good touch point to ask questions as implementation moves forward with these approved plans with recommended corrective actions. And so just noting that if progress isn't made, we do still have the ability, if there isn't progress made to achieving the sustainability goals or significant data gaps are not being addressed, there is the ability for DWR to find that GSP inadequate at those check-in points, those 5-year check-in points, and be referred to the state board. So that is an option, but there are other options for trying to fill those data gaps and improve and work through those recommended corrective actions as plans are being implemented. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. And the next 2 questions are for Craig. So Craig, when will DWR be conducting, or will DWR be conducting the same review process for alternative groundwater sustainability plans?
So, yeah, I mean, I assume the question is talking about the basins with approved alternatives that are going to be submitting their 5-year update. And both alternatives and groundwater sustainability plans, as I think I mentioned earlier, are required to periodically and no less than every 5 years, submit an update. And the department is also called out in the Act as needing to review plans every 5 years or alternatives every 5 years, and to issue a written assessment. I believe that the law states that those DWR's periodic evaluation, again, no less than every 5 years, will focus on how the GSP is or alternative is being implemented to achieve the sustainability goal for the basin. So I do expect that those periodic evaluations from the department will be more focused on how implementation is going and how progress is being made towards achieving the sustainability goal. But yes, we will be doing the so-called 5-year update, the review of those 5-year updates, just like we will with GSPs.
Thank you. So the next question, this is going back to the sustainable management criteria. How does DWR look at representative monitoring sites and the definition of minimum thresholds?
So a couple things, I guess, that could possibly be helpful to answer this question. One is that we are looking for, of course, the things that are required in SGMA, the regulations, and so I'd recommend everyone go take a look at the regulations as well as the best management practice document. The regulations, for example, identify 6 things that should be documented for the minimum thresholds. Those include, and I don't have them in front of me, but things like how those minimum thresholds could affect the interests of beneficial uses and users of groundwater, how those thresholds were set with consideration of, and I'm paraphrasing here, but adjacent basins, how other regulatory thresholds were considered. So we're looking that the GSA is showing their work, again, using that term that I used earlier, documenting those things for us so that we can see their thought process, that they've gone through the required steps to identify minimum thresholds using best available data and best available information.
Thank you. So our next question is for Keith. Keith, where can locals find BWR's information for the support services that you mentioned, such as the facilitation support services?
Thanks, Kirsten. Yeah, so that information can be found on our assistance and engagement page, and I just shared the link to that site through the chat function. Hopefully that came through okay. But within that, on that page, there are a number of different tabs. One is communication engagement, and so that can give you information about upcoming events, and then our communication and engagement toolkit and some other guidance and resource materials. But then we also have a technical services tab, a facilitation support tab, and I think that's what's specifically being asked here. And so if you click on that tab, then you scroll down a little bit, there's an actual button that would allow you to go through or start the facilitation application process. So if you start doing that and you have any questions, feel free to reach out to your basin point of contact. If you scroll up to the I guess top of the page, not quite the very top, but there are various icons to the 4 different regional offices, and each one of those boxes that you see has a link to a map that shows which point of contact is assigned to which basin. So if you have any questions about who you're assigned to, that's where you can verify that.
Thank you, Keith. The next question is for Craig. Craig, can there be projects to conduct recharge to support domestic well uses?
The very short answer is yes. And I'm thinking, that's obviously not a simple task to accomplish, and there's a lot to consider when GSAs are considering those kinds of projects. Feasibility, water source, water quality impacts, CEQA, et cetera. But at a high level, yes, I mean, definitely projects can be implemented to recharge groundwater generally in support of implementing a GSP, and definitely to support domestic well use.
Thank you.
And that's all.
The next question is back to Keith. Keith, what funding is available for groundwater sustainability agencies to conduct water supply projects, such as above and below groundwater storage?
Yeah, so I touched upon this a little bit, that we have some definitive funding in hand, which is part of our Sustainable Groundwater Management Implementation Grant Program. And so right now, there is $70 million that will be available for our next round of funding, and projects like this would be eligible, for that round. But with the governor's budget, what is hopefully will be approved, in total there will hopefully be $360 million to also infuse into that implementation grant program, and also the ability to have some additional planning work done, that was through our Sustainable Groundwater Management Planning Grant Program. But regardless of the upcoming budget cycle, there will definitely be that $70 million available for applying for projects like this. So the above ground storage, as you all know, is a little bit more tricky, but as far as providing funding for groundwater storage, like recharge projects and things like that, or in lieu recharge projects, those are absolutely eligible projects. I think, just if I can add on to what Craig was mentioning earlier in terms of, can there be projects to conduct recharge to support domestic well use? That would also be another type of project that would be eligible for funding. And so we definitely have, some funding available to us. Hopefully we'll get a lot more, and that will really expand the amount of financial assistance we can provide.
Great, thank you. The next question for Craig, and this is about the public comment process and the groundwater sustainability plans. Can interested parties continue to provide public comments as plans move forward with addressing deficiencies?
Yes, so we've made the decision to leave the public comment functionality on the Sigma portal, or specifically on GSPs that were submitted via the Sigma portal, open. And so interested parties can still continue to use the public comment functionality there. Those comments are not only then made available to department staff, but our portal automatically notifies the GSA or the point of contact once a comment is submitted so that the GSA can be made aware as well.
Thank you. So the next question is for Stephen. How are you or will you be dealing with groundwater sustainability agencies that may not meet the deadlines? And then I provided an example for in areas that have limited internet and community engagement due to COVID restrictions.
Yeah, this is a really important one, especially as we find ourselves, in these challenging times of COVID, and so I think that really the answer here in my mind is there's twofold. There's the regulatory and legal or the law side of things, and then there's the assistance side. But before we dive into that, I just want to highlight, we all know that COVID has been unprecedented in its effects to, across the world and in California too. And so we fully acknowledge that there have been impacts or effects and across local governments, across communities. And so we acknowledge that. We've seen letters come in on this topic specifically to the governor's office, and our team, working with our director, Director Namath, has been working with governor's office and has put down some responses to those letters. But in general, on the more of the water code or law side of things, we at DWR have to follow the law that's on the books right now. And right now, that law states in Sigma that we have to have a plan that's received by the deadline, and if not, that triggers state board intervention. And so that is one element of this that's in play. We do acknowledge that there is active legislation that is working its way through that's related to this that might grant an extension. If that were to go through, that's something that we would have to acknowledge and work through. And then on the more of the assistance side is that we definitely want to hear as soon as possible, and we have been working with basins. Again, this is where the strength of our region offices really come in, working with these basins that have these issues, and continuing that. So continuing the forms of assistance that Keith mentioned earlier, and really dialing in what could be helpful between now and the deadline, and then after the deadline, to help address this issue. And one thing to note is just the long-term nature of Sigma and the plan implementation. And in the case of outreach and engagement, it's important to note that engagement on a GSP development is not a one-time product. It's really a long-term process that takes place over many years. And so there's no perfect amount of engagement, but if there was some difficulties, to make sure that it's really known and documented in the plan where those difficulties and challenges were, and then so everyone it's upfront and honest with what happened and where there's plans to make improvements or make updates going forward. And so that would be really good for us to see and our review teams to see that. And then it also help us align our assistance activities to help work through those challenges as you all in the basins continue to implement your plans, and we'll do our best to be providing support as we move forward. So I'll end it there. Thanks.
Thank you, Stephen. So Craig, the next, I believe, 3 or 4 questions are for you. The next question is long, so I'll repeat it after I read it out loud. what additional considerations should GSAs of more complex basins keep in mind when looking to the 4 reviewed basins for guidance? What are some complexities that might not be reflected in those reviews? So again, the main question is, what additional considerations should GSAs of more complex basins keep in mind when looking to the 4 reviewed basins for guidance?
I would say that to focus on the kind of the fundamental nature of some of those recommended corrective actions and then preliminary, required corrective actions in the letters. Some of those deal with pretty fundamental aspects of how sustainable management criteria were identified. And I think some of those things will be broadly applicable to sustainable management criteria in other basins. And then as far as what are some complexities that might not be reflected in those reviews, certainly, a couple come to mind. The first being coordination agreements. Obviously, none of the basins that have these initial decisions have multiple plans. And so those basins with multiple plans and with a coordination agreement, that adds another layer of complexity to consider. Another one that might not be reflected in these first decisions, there's some saying this word too many times today, sustainability indicators that weren't as applicable to those first few basins, and maybe the biggest one being land subsidence. So you'll see that some of the basins for example, in the San Joaquin Valley, that's a much bigger issue than it was in these first 4 basins. So that kind of presents a new technical issue. I don't know if any of my colleagues have any other, anything else they wanted to chime in on for this question or not. Definitely, it's definitely true that some of the basins that remain are very complex. But if not, I guess we can move on to the next question.
All right,
Okay.
Thank you. I'll start for the next question. I'll start with you, and then I also see if Sarah Sugar from the State Water Resources Control Board wants to add anything onto it. For basins that are composed of multiple groundwater sustainability agencies, if one is deemed inadequate, is the rest of the plan of that basin affected? And if so, how?
So I'll start out and reiterate an earlier comment that we will be issuing decisions at the basin or sub-basin scale. That's sort of the fundamental, unit of area that we release determinations on. So if a basin with multiple plans, the plan for the whole basin is deemed inadequate for whatever reason, then that basin would be referred to the State Water Resources Control Board. And I think maybe there I could turn it over to Sarah to talk about how their next steps could consider individual areas within a basin or sub-basin as you move through your process. I'll turn it over to you, Sarah.
Sure, thanks, Craig. Yeah, as Craig said, the state board would intervene at the basin scale and not the GSP area scale. But there are a few specific situations outlined in the statute where sort of part of the basin being managed under a good plan could affect state intervention. And that's, under state intervention, the pumpers in the basin would have to report their extractions annually to the State Water Board and pay associated fees. But there's the opportunity for the board to decide that certain extractions are conducted under a plan that that adequately manages groundwater for that portion of the basin, and those extractions could be sort of extraction reporting could be waived for those extractors. And then also, if the board gets to the point where they're developing an interim plan for the basin, the board will include elements of plans or groundwater sustainability plans that the board finds complies with the sustainability goal for the basin. So we can incorporate GSPs or parts of GSPs into our interim plan. Thanks.
And of course,
Sarah?
I always want to, this is Craig again, if I could just chime in, I always want to take the opportunity to mention that and I know this is a message that both Sarah and I have made many times, that when state intervention is needed, the goal, of course, is to address deficiencies and then return basins to local control as soon as practical. And so, just wanted to remind everyone that is, going to be the goal of state intervention, is to address deficiencies and then return basins as quickly as possible to local control once those deficiencies are addressed.
Yes, thanks, Craig.
Great, thank you. So Craig, the next one's for you as well. What is the general timeline that DWR will be releasing the remaining determinations this year?
So, as I mentioned, there isn't a formula for which basins when necessarily. Ideally, though, my hope is that we can have another batch of determinations or information released in the fall timeframe, and then some of those basins that are the most complicated are likely to take nearly the full 2 years. So it could be at the end of this year before information on some of those most complex basins is released. Again, a lot is subject to change. We'll do the best we can, though, to get information out when it's ready and as soon as we can.
So the next one is both for you and for Stephen. So I'll let you guys decide who's going to go respond first. How should a groundwater sustainability agency address drinking water issues in their groundwater sustainability plan?
Yeah, this is Stephen. I'll start. So want to really acknowledge that, in times of drought like this, when groundwater is used more, these are times where we're seeing, those drought-related impacts, and also, to some of those most vulnerable communities, and protecting water supply for those most vulnerable communities remains, it is a top priority for the entire department, not just our group within the Sustainable Groundwater Management Office. And so it's important, and I think really SGMA and the GSP development process and implementation is helping a lot collectively to understand these issues more, to understand what solutions are out there and available and can be brought to bear, and also partnering with other state agencies like the State Water Board and others to bring all of the potential solutions and assistance to this important topic. But as the question was specific to GSPs, really there's a couple of things I just wanted to highlight, and again, this is where, in reading the first two assessments and then the first two notification letters will highlight as well, is that there's areas where we have reviewed information and provided guidance or direction on how to be addressing drinking water issues in GSPs, whether those are corrective actions to incorporate best available data on groundwater conditions, quality, and well infrastructure. So number one, understanding where these drinking water wells are is paramount in order to understand how they're affected, or then how to find solutions. So understanding where they are is very important, and that is in the elements of the regulations, and GSPs have a lot more information than ever before on that. But there is still work to be done, obviously, to understand where those active wells are. Then there's also requirements in the regulations, information in the plans, and actions that we've asked and will continue to ask about to evaluate and disclose the impacts of groundwater sustainability plans, management criteria on groundwater infrastructure, including domestic wells. And then getting back a little bit to understanding where wells are, there's recommendations to inventory and better define the locations of active wells in these basins, and really knowing that that's not a near-term item, that's going to take some time because that's very complex. And so really working on that over the subsequent updates to GSPs. And then other things that come to mind are knowing impacts to drinking water wells caused by groundwater management, should they occur, and then trying to document those over time, whether it's annual reports or those 5-year updates to GSPs. And then getting into projects and actions, this is where all of the work that's been done to understand better the groundwater system conditions, groundwater infrastructure in these basins, leads to then what types of projects and actions are needed to address whether it's drinking water impacts or other considerations to reach sustainability. And so that's where there's different things that could be done as forms of looking at how to work with well owners and, number one, provide education. Also, there's other projects and actions that could be done to help well owners weather drought conditions and weather declining groundwater levels. And then that gets into some of the financial assistance that Keith highlighted that is either in hand or is a potential to be getting this budget cycle, where we are connecting our funding opportunities to addressing these challenges of drinking water impacts. So we're trying to connect that. And then I see there's a couple other questions related to this, and I think we might, maybe in a subsequent question, we'll also highlight that through some of the drought executive order items, specifically executive order item 11 in the April executive order is to develop drinking water well principles and strategies. And so Melissa Sparks-Kranz can provide an update on what we're doing with that and where we're headed there, and some near-term opportunities for public engagement and feedback on those. So I would see if any of my colleagues would want to add anything to that specific question, knowing that there's a question or two coming that has a similar, or we could just combine that now.
I'm happy to talk about this drought executive action, item 11 that Stephen is referencing. So the action was included in the April 21st executive proclamation by the governor, and the action specifically calls out that the Department of Water Resources is to work in coordination with the State Water Board to develop groundwater management principles and strategies to monitor, analyze, and minimize impacts to drinking water wells. This work is really related to our ensuring that potential drought impacts on communities are anticipated and proactively addressed. And so this work is going to align with the efforts that we are doing under our SGMA regulatory role, but it is broader than just SGMA. It is, our state, both between the department and the state water board's role in and oversight with groundwater management, which includes both programs within DWR and the State Water Board. So to really launch this effort in developing these principles and strategies, we are starting with hosting listening sessions, and you may have seen that information shared through various distributions. Recently, we're hosting 3 listening sessions that are going to take place next week. June 29th, there will be 2 sessions starting at noon, and then also an evening session at 5 o'clock. And then on June 30th, we're also going to hold the 3rd listening session at noon during the day. These listening sessions are an opportunity for the department and the State Water Board staff to gather input, to hear from locals, to hear from communities, what impacts you're experiencing related to drinking water wells specifically. That's what these principles and strategies are going to work towards summarizing, is what challenges you're experiencing locally on the ground, and what policy and strategy, meaning tactical like tools, approaches, models, efforts that we can help summarize to have a collective sort of shared policy document that will help us manage this drought and future droughts. So this is really intended to be a long-term document that we continue to use and work collectively on our drought preparedness and management. So we really look forward to hearing your input and hearing what types of strategies you and your communities have already deployed or would like to see deployed related to drinking water wells. And if you have any additional questions, you can absolutely email us at the same email, sgmps@water.ca.gov, and that will be the same contact for us to get in touch with you. If you have comments or would like to make comments at the listening sessions next week, or if you cannot attend the listening sessions, we are always open for hearing from you. So I think that answers that question on the drought executive action and the policy principle drinking water well work.
Yeah, thank you, Melissa. This is Stephen again. Just wanted to add on a little bit and just mention that I added a link in the chat to the webpage that our team recently added on the drinking water principles that has a lot of the information and additional information that Melissa just went through. So that's a good resource if you're interested more about the drinking water principles and where we're headed with that effort. And then another related thing, and there's a link to this on that drinking water principles webpage, is that our team also works on and helps maintain the My Dry Water Supply webpage. And that's an existing tool that was born out of the last drought that's been, we're using it for this drought to track. It's a voluntary tracking system or reporting system for dry household water wells. And so that's another thing that it's a tool as in a form of assistance that GSAs, anyone can use and don't have to invest their own resources in developing something like that. They can use the state's tool, and that information that gets reported to that tool is available for use so you can see which dry wells have been reported in your particular basin, county, in table form and in map form. So that is a resource related to this question as well. All right, thank you.
Thank you all. So we're going to move on to our next question. And this is about the drought, which I know is really in the forefront of all our minds. And this is directed for you, Stephen. Has the current drought affected your review or other work? And if so, how?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and as already mentioned, the drought is, when there's drought, we know that there's an increase in groundwater use. And really that's the long-term benefits of SGMA implementation, is that we get to a sustainable use and supply of groundwater long-term, and we're able to better withstand droughts that we know that are coming in the future. And so where it's affected our work, we have been working with our overall drought team within the Department of Water Resources, within other sister agencies, to make sure that we're sharing as much information as we can. And there's a lot of new information that we didn't have in the last drought that we now have, which is an increased number of monitoring wells, groundwater monitoring wells, which translates into, there's about 1,300 new monitoring wells that came in as part of these 50 plus GSPs, or about 50 GSPs. Those monitoring wells and other monitoring wells have generated over 100,000 new measurements, and all of that information is, we're making that available through the California Natural Resources Agency Open Data Portal and other avenues like the SGMA Data Viewer. So that's one area of our work that's affected our work, that we're really trying hard to get this information out and accessible so that the GSAs can use this information, that the public can use this information, anyone and everyone can use this information to make informed decisions while we're in this drought and moving forward for continued groundwater management. So that's that's one area that that is affecting our work. And then let's see, just trying to think of another one, if there's any other ideas from the team on that one. And then I think another item is the just education about the importance of groundwater is a big one that has affected our work. And so we're trying to educate the public that groundwater is an important component to the state's water supply, making up almost 60% of the state's water supply in drought years. And so it's really, I think, will help all of us if we have a better awareness of groundwater and its importance to the state and the need to have comprehensive management like we do now with SGMA, and that SGMA, although very challenging, especially during drought times, is worth it and needed for that long-term resilience for our state's water supply. I think I can stop there and see if there's any other questions we want to highlight now.
I think we have one more and then we can move into closing remarks. And just for a reminder of everyone on the phone, if we didn't get to your question today, or if you have a question that comes up after the webinar, you can always email it to that email address, sgmps@water.ca.gov. So our last question is also for Stephen. How does the My Dry Well tool get its reports? What do the dots on the maps represent? Do they represent dry wells, nature of individual problems? What do those dots mean?
Yeah, great question. And maybe one of my colleagues can drop the My Dry Water Supply webpage link in the chat. And that way, as I'm answering, you can pull that page up. And so what those dots represent, again, this tool is a voluntary tool. So information that comes into it is from well owners themselves that are experiencing shortages. So that can be in the form of a dry well. It could be in the form of a dry spring or any type of way that a household gets its water. So there is some variability on the types of reports, and that's explained on the form. And there's different options on the form. And so, but the vast majority of what's reported on this system is dry residential wells. So domestic wells that have experienced a shortage or dry or no water left in them. So those are the dots that are shown on the map. There is a way we've color coded those so we can see which wells have been reported in the last month, within the last year, and then more than a year ago. And many of those were reported in the last drought because this tool was developed in 2012. And we've been making enhancements to it since then, but we are planning, and we've been getting a lot of great feedback on how to make this tool even more useful and used. And so we will be going through an enhancement of the system or the tool to make it more accessible, easier to use, more apparent on how to use it. And so that's coming in the next few weeks that our teams are working on that right now based on feedback we've received. And so we're working through that. So again, the dots on the map represent mostly dry wells that are reported across the state. And they're very focused on households and not community water systems or public water supply systems. It's more on the domestic wells.
Great, thank you. So we're going to wrap up the question and answer session. I do believe we got a couple of questions at the very end, so we will try to follow up with those individuals after, but we want to make sure we end today's webinar on time. So we're going to now move into some closing remarks from Stephen.
All right. Well, thank you all. Wanted to thank everyone for joining today. We got a lot of great questions today, and we did our best to provide the answers that we have. And Again, pointing you to a lot of resources that are available on our webpage. And there is a lot there, so we encourage you to check that out. I just want to do a special thanks to our team that helped answer the questions today, helped orchestrate all of the events that ran up to this webinar. So from our DWR team, Stantec, and then also our colleagues at the State Board for being involved today too. We hope you felt that or got input or information out of this forum and it was helpful for you. We know that there's a lot of additional questions that are out there or that will be generated as we move through this. And we'll make an announcement through our Sigma email listserv when that is available and point people to links there. So again, if we weren't able to answer your question today, we will do our best to follow up after the webinar. And again, just want to thank you all for your time. I hope you're enjoying the early part of this summer. And thank you again for all your work on Sigma. We'll end it there. Thanks. Bye.
Thanks, Stephen. So as we go out, we're gonna, if you have not seen, DWR staff put together a video about the GSP assessment process, and then also about the drinking water principles they mentioned. So if you haven't seen that video, we're gonna stop the actual webinar now, but we're gonna play it as we go out, and we encourage you to stay and watch it if you haven't seen it yet. And then we'll also put a link in the chat to the YouTube version of this so you can watch it on your own time. So thank you again for attending today's webinar. If you have any feedback, always feel free to email us. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Stephen Springhorn, Acting Deputy Director of Statewide Groundwater Management at the California Department of Water Resources. I'm here today along with my colleague, Craig Altair, and we would like to provide information on 3 new developments. First, DWR's release of the first Groundwater Sustainability Plan assessments under the state's Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, or SGMA. Second, the current landscape of groundwater and our current drought conditions. And finally, recent efforts to advance the development of principles around groundwater management and drinking water well impacts. Today marks a major milestone in our collective work implementing SGMA. We at DWR are releasing the first assessments of groundwater sustainability plans. These initial assessments are being released ahead of the statutory deadline in an effort to continue our communication on these assessments. Our aim is to provide clear feedback to the local groundwater sustainability agencies and remaining members of the SGMA community. Arriving at this SGMA milestone represents a significant amount of work done by local agencies to develop plans, countless hours that the broader SGMA community has spent participating and providing input on those plans, and the review and evaluation of thousands of pages of plan content by the state. Additional details on these first plan assessments are the focus of today's discussion. However, before we cover that topic, I wanted to first acknowledge the drought conditions we're experiencing today. These remind us of just how important groundwater is to our state. California's groundwater touches all types of uses and industries. Groundwater supports our natural environment, agriculture, economy, and drinking water, with 85% of Californians relying on groundwater for some portion of their drinking water supply. SGMA was born out of the last drought, and as we now find ourselves back in drought conditions, the hard work from the last 6 years of SGMA implementation is already paying dividends. As an example, over 260 GSAs have formed and almost 50 GSPs have been developed and are being implemented for the critically overdrafted basins. These have been submitted to DWR for review and assessment. Another 70 to 90 plans are being developed now, and local agencies will begin implementing them in the next 6 months. A lot has been done, however, we know that much more work remains because SGMA is a massive, new initiative that is advancing our collective knowledge and filling the long-term management gaps that have existed in California. For over 100 years, surface water has been managed in California, capturing snowpack runoff and rainfall in reservoirs, and moving water through man-made canals such as the California Aqueduct. Sustainable groundwater management is a relatively new statewide effort to balance the use of surface water and groundwater. Groundwater acts as the state's drought buffer or savings account in dry or drought years. We use more groundwater when surface water supplies are limited or unavailable. However, we need to strategically manage our water resources in average and wet years when excess surface water is available to maximize recharge and take advantage of the significant storage capacity of our groundwater basins for long-term and future use. With both sides of the water cycle now actively managed, we are better prepared for our changing future. Protecting our groundwater resources in our variable climate requires thoughtful solutions. The administration's water resilience portfolio recognizes and calls for the continued commitment to implementing SGMA in Action 3.1, and there are many other complementary actions that help the state advance statewide groundwater management for more resilient water resources. Under SGMA, there are both near-term milestones, such as the assessments being released today, and long-term actions that need to translate into measurable progress under the law's 20-year planning horizon. This will help locals adaptively manage and continue improving and updating plans to reach sustainability goals in their basins. Managing California's groundwater sustainably is critical to our state. We must apply a continuum of approaches for locals to adaptively manage, update GSPs, and continue to stay focused on implementation with projects and actions that address both supply and demand. This balance between near-term groundwater needs, such as providing a reliable drinking water supply for some communities, and the long-term sustainability of our groundwater resources will require clearly defined projects and actions. State and local agencies will need to work together to manage supplies for a variety of conditions. A recent action related to groundwater and drought is Governor Newsom's April 21st Drought Executive Order. In the order, he tasked DWR with developing groundwater management principles and strategies related to analyzing, monitoring, and minimizing impacts to drinking water wells. This will ensure that those potential drought impacts on communities are anticipated and proactively addressed. DWR, in coordination with the State Water Board, will be launching this effort to develop these principles and strategies with the input from the groundwater community, interested parties, and the public. It is important that these principles and strategies provide tools for addressing the real challenges we face when it comes to safeguarding drinking water for all Californians. The state is currently working with locals to address drought conditions. This is why SGMA's long-term planning efforts and these first assessments are so important. DWR, along with our colleagues from the State Water Board, will host a live question and answer session on Thursday, June 24th. This will be an opportunity for the SGMA community to come together and discuss the first round of assessments. For more information on the plan assessments, I'd like to pass it over to my colleague, Craig Altair.
Hello. My name is Craig Altair, and I'm the manager for DWR's Groundwater Sustainability Plan Review Program. One of DWR's primary roles in the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, or SGMA, is to review locally developed plans to make sure they comply with the law and regulations. Today, I will walk through the decision pathways for our review and discuss the first assessments that have recently been released. DWR has 3 possible regulatory outcomes for groundwater sustainability plans, or GSPs: approved, incomplete, and inadequate. Approved plans are the ones that comply with the law and regulations and that demonstrate a clear path to achieving sustainability. These plans will not be perfect, and DWR will recommend certain corrective actions that the Groundwater Sustainability Agencies, or GSAs, should address early in implementation. GSAs in basins with approved plans, particularly basins that were critically overdrafted before SGMA, still have a lot of work to do to implement their plans over the next 20 years and to show that they are making progress toward their goals. Next, incomplete plans are those with one or more deficiencies that preclude DWR's approval. After consulting with agencies that develop these plans, DWR can give up to 180 days for the deficiencies to be addressed. Finally, if the local agency cannot address the deficiencies within that period, or if the initial GSP had deficiencies that could not be addressed in 180 days, DWR can determine groundwater sustainability plans to be inadequate. We recently completed our assessment of plans for the Santa Cruz Mid-County Basin and the 180 400-foot aquifer subbasin and determined that those plans are approved. GSAs in those basins will continue implementing their plans to achieve SGMA's goal of groundwater sustainability within 20 years. Additionally, we have notified GSAs in the Cuyama Valley Basin and the Paso Robles subbasin that their plans lack specific details that may preclude DWR's approval. We will consult with these GSAs to discuss corrective actions they will need to make to improve their plans. This initial release should make it clear that DWR takes seriously its role to ensure the GSAs have followed the regulatory process, including identifying the effects of groundwater management on the interests of beneficial uses and users of groundwater. We strongly encourage all GSAs to read the materials from this first release to understand how DWR has evaluated the plans. Following this initial release, DWR will release subsequent groundwater sustainability plan assessments in a tiered manner throughout 2021 and early 2022, with the most complex plans that take more time to review coming at the end of that time frame. Assessments will be issued at the basin or subbasin scale. We strongly urge GSAs and basins with plans under review to begin planning now for how they will work together quickly if DWR provides notification that deficiencies need to be addressed.
This is a pivotal time, and DWR stands ready to carry out our decision-making role and continue providing technical, planning, and financial assistance to locals implementing SGMA. These links provide more information on DWR's assistance and the plan assessments. If you have SGMA questions, please email us at sgmps@water.ca.gov. We look forward to our continued work implementing SGMA and hearing from you at the live Q&A on June 24th.